is Suryagupta. And as Kusala Sara said, we're completing our series of talks on a Tibetan yogi called Milarepa. So I don't know how many of you were here, have been here and listening, but I'll sort of recap just so you get a sense of who he is. Sort of recapping a bit about his life, why, and also really trying to answer the question really as to why we study him, why he's still an important figure. What's the sort of essence of his teachings really that can be relevant to us now, like literally now, like this week, but also in the future as well, for a sort of what can we ponder on over time that will bear fruit for us, and what sort of what kind of teachings can we make use of now that comes from this man who was very alive and having a really effect on the world in the 11th century. So as we've been hearing, there's been lots of descriptions of him. So there's lots of words that were used to describe him over the weeks, and if you Google him and read his books. So there's a few, we've been studying this book, The Yogi's Joy by Sangharakshita, but there's also this book, The 100,000 Songs of Milarepa. And any of the biographies as well about him, they'll describe him in a number of ways. They'll use words like, inspirational teacher, great guru. They'll also use words like genius, crazy, shocking, controversial, spontaneous, direct, devoted, committed. Quite a number of different words are used to describe Milarepa. And one of the reasons of that was because, his life was extraordinary. His life was extraordinary, and he became extraordinary in terms of who he was. You could definitely describe him as extraordinary sort of character. But his life starts in a very ordinary fashion. So, like most of these stories, things are very just kind of conventional. His life starts in a very conventional way. He lives with his mum and dad and sister, and everything's going okay until his dad suddenly dies. So his dad suddenly dies, and he's taken in by his uncle and aunt, they've promised his father that they'll be looked after. Very distressing situation. They're taken in. They look for refuge. They look for support by their relatives, and their relatives in effect betray them. They treat them very badly. They in fact sort of become slaves really. They take away their inheritance, their rights, and truly trick them into a life of servitude. And there's no obvious way out for them. And his mother becomes, deeply unhappy, angry, to have been brought so low. So his mother becomes very angry, and she says to Milarepa, you have to take revenge. You have to, get what we deserve really back from them, and take revenge really for what they've done to us. So Milarepa, does what his mum says. He goes and trains. She sends him off to train in the dark arts. He becomes very accomplished, and decides to get his own back on his aunt and uncle, and practices these arts at a wedding feast that they're hosting, and the house that they're in collapses. I think his uncle and aunt actually survive this, but 35 other people die. So that's a very extreme sort of event that happens, and in a way they were looking for a way out of what seemed like a trapped situation. They wanted to change a status quo that they were in, and revenge seemed to be the answer. But actually, what happened was They were out of one situation, but they found themselves in a much worsened state. And I was thinking this is all a bit extreme, one of the things you find in a storybook, but actually I was thinking it's not particularly extreme. It's not extreme. What's not extreme is that actually when we act on our anger, it often has consequences beyond what we imagine. It has consequences beyond what we imagine now and into the future. And you only have to pick up the newspaper to see people that wanted to get their own back, wanted to teach somebody a lesson, and suddenly it becomes this very difficult, very complex set of events that seem to have a life of their own. And this is kind of what happens to Milarepa. Yes, the situation's changed. He's no longer trapped. They're no longer trapped by their aunt and uncle, but now they're at war with the whole village. There's 35 people who are suffering, and families and friends who are suffering because of his actions. So yes, the war extends that he's in, extends to the village, and he has to flee for his life. So he flees for his life, leaving behind his mother and his sister, who he was there to protect, leaving them behind, and having really a very heavy conscience. He didn't necessarily, when he set out to take revenge, he wasn't thinking about what was actually going to happen. So he's got this very heavy conscience that he has to bear, and he's separated from all that he loves, all that he's known at this time as well. So yes, and he's at war with himself, isn't he? If you've done something like that, you're at war with yourself. He's sort of suffering from remorse, regret, confusion, anger, hatred. Still, all the mix of emotions I imagine him having at that time, and he knows he needs help. So this is it's a classic beginning of a story. We have the conventional sort of beginning where everything's all right. Sort of hero's journey, if you're familiar with that. Everything's fine, and then something happens that disrupts everything. And the hero to-be is thrust into this world that's very, very unfamiliar. So Milarepa's thrust into this world where he's sort of got these intense emotions. He knows that if he doesn't get help, he's completely doomed. It'll become a tragedy, basically, if he doesn't get some help. So he eventually, fortunately, finds a teacher called Marpa. He's known as Marpa the translator. And Marpa puts him through the trials and tribulations, because every hero of a story needs the trials and tribulations, don't they? And I was thinking about why do we need to go through a hard time? I include ourselves, because we're all sort of got our own journeys here. Why do we need to go through trials and tribulations? Why do people in stories, sort of heroic stories, have to go through these trials and tribulations? Any ideas?
In order to grow.
In order to grow, yeah. Any other reasons?
Seems like we never really learn intellectually. We need to have these knocks and things to really make us change.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. In order to grow, and actually suffering teaches us things, isn't it? We're forced to sort of meet aspects of ourselves when we suffer. So yes, both those reasons, and I think also to the sort of the hero of a story needs to prove to themselves really something. They need to prove that they're worthy really in some way of growing. They're worthy of the cause. In a way, it's something about you've set out on this quest. You're in this unknown world. You set out on this quest, but how do you know you're up to it? How do you really know you can do it? And somehow the trials and tribulations, when they come, you're forced up against your qualities, you're forced to really think, actually, I can do this. And this is what happens to Milarepa. Marpa puts him through his paces, he gets him to build these houses, and then when the houses are built, he gets him to tear them down, which I can't really imagine, to be honest with you. I can't really imagine physically building these houses and then having to dismantle them, but that's what happens to Milarepa. And each time that happens, Milarepa has to show himself that he's really committed, that he really does want to grow, that he's not going to be put off by the obstacles in his way. He's going to keep going, and that's what he does. He keeps going. Marpa keeps giving him these another house to build, tell him, oh no, take it down, and each time Milarepa has to go, can I really do this? Am I really up for this? Do I really want this? And the answer every time is yes, because if he doesn't, then the alternative for him is tragedy. So it's either triumph for him or tragedy here. That's how high the stakes are. And it's actually Marpa's wife. Marpa's married with two children. It's Marpa's wife that finally says to Marpa, okay, give him a break. He's done his dues. He's shown you that he's really serious. Give him the teachings. And then Marpa finally gives him the teachings and takes him on as his student. So yes, and in the story, in a hero's journey, the student, the hero, has these trials and tribulations in order to grow, in order to discover what they're really about, in order to discover their potential as well. And then when they do eventually discover their ultimate potential, they then bring a gift back to the community. They bring the truth back to actually benefit the situations that they've left behind. So yes, that's Milarepa's and the beginning of his story. So he goes off. Marpa gives him these instructions, these teachings, and Milarepa goes off and really becomes this realised being. Marpa himself's an interesting character. He's said married with children, but he goes off travelling a lot. He goes off to India collecting teachings. And he's also described in an interesting way as well. He's described as quite a tough character, and we see that from the way that he is with Milarepa. Quite tough, even rough, I would say, by our standards. But he's also this inspirational teacher as well. So there's quite a lot of descriptions about Marpa, and in fact they come from a whole lineage where each teacher is described in quite sort of a strong ways, lots of strong adjectives, and you get the sense that they're very unconventional kind of people, yes, and they're different to each other, and they're unlike anyone else you've met. That's the sort of lineage that Milarepa comes from. So yes, I was thinking about these sort of descriptions and thinking, why do we use these sort of these sort of superlatives, really? These sort of he's this character, he's that character. We're using all these words, and I think the reason we use these words is because it's hard to pin Milarepa down. It's hard to pin Milarepa down. It's even hard to pin Marpa down. It's hard to even understand why Marpa's putting Milarepa through these paces and then is totally devoted to him after that. It's a very sort of like trying to get your head around it. It's like the expression that we use, isn't it? We try and get our head around something. And when we're trying to get our head around something, we're trying to conceptually understand our experience, yeah? So here we're trying to conceptually understand a character like Milarepa. How does somebody like that exist? And the Buddha was the same. People they used all these different kind of words to understand, to describe the Buddha, but none of them quite fit. You couldn't actually pin the Buddha down through words. And it's the same with Milarepa. You can't pin him down through describing him. So I was thinking, well, if you can't pin him down through conceptual words, what can we do? What can we do to get closer to the sense of what he might have been like? So then what's our other way of doing it? If we're trying it conceptually and it doesn't quite work, what's our other way of doing it? Trying to get closer to an experience.
Maybe images or poetry?
Yeah, images.
More creative?
Yeah, more creative, a creative way of engaging. So our imagination, yes? So we can, this is what I try and do anyway, with the Buddha and any characters. I try and sort of imagine, okay, all right, imagine now, I've described them like this, they're a genius, they're inspirational, they're, all these things, but actually let me try and imagine what it's actually like being in front of them. So you can use poetry, you can use art. That's another way that we try to describe experience, to get closer to experience. But we can also just try and imagine, put ourselves in somebody's shoes. So we can do that now. Like, let's imagine Milarepa, we just meet him in the road, yeah? But the little context you have to set is that we have to imagine that we're familiar with yogis, because in Tibetan society they would have been familiar with people meditating, going off in caves meditating. So we have to be familiar with people meditating, and we have to have them in generally good esteem, yes? Milarepa was often, they describe him as someone who sometimes didn't wear very much clothes, for example, and sometimes no clothes at all. But if you're familiar with yogis and if you hold them in high esteem, you might know then that there are these people that meditate in caves. Sometimes they're a bit unconventional. Sometimes they might not wear very much clothes. So we can imagine that we see this man. He's not got very much clothes on, but let's say he's clothed today. Let's say he's not naked today. So he hasn't got much clothes on, but that doesn't faze us because we know the yogis exist, right? But there's something about him. Maybe we see him. Maybe there's a few people around him, and there's something about his being, his presence, that we find intriguing. It's his look, because he's not wearing very much. Maybe his hair is quite wild, but there's something in his being as well. So maybe he seems very relaxed. Maybe he seems very open. Maybe he seems very free somehow. Maybe he's kind of smiling, but maybe he's just there's just this intensity to how he appears. People say in the Buddha's time that people were just drawn to the Buddha, and the Buddha didn't have to say anything often. People were just drawn to his energy. Sometimes it was like the warmth. They would just feel this warmth towards around him and want to be in his presence. So we can imagine that this character, Milarepa, there's something about him that draws us to him. And maybe he's noticed us as well. I imagine that he would notice us. If we notice him, he's going to be aware of us probably as well. And as we're in front of him, well, what do we say? So we're drawn to, I don't know if this has ever happened to you, where you're drawn to somebody and you don't actually know why. Has that ever happened to anybody? You're sort of like, okay, I'm standing next to somebody, you seem interesting, there's something interesting about you, but we don't necessarily know why, but we want to say something, yeah? We want to make contact. So I imagine that I would probably, I don't know, what would you say, sort of like, what's your name? Or where do you live, or what do you do, something like that. Or it might be, you might actually want to get rid of all those pleasantries. There might be something on your mind, and there's something about this character, this being, that you feel you can tell him. You can say the thing that you're worried about or you've been wondering about. And as you talk to him, he really does listen. He almost as if he's like, you feel really taken in, like you've never really been listened to before, and you're sort of like you've been busy, you've walked up to this guy, and suddenly you relax, and almost as if you can't. The rest of the environment sort of disappears, and you're just in front of this man. And you ask him your question, or you tell him what you really want to tell him. So Milarepa, when people did this, and this is actually what happened, he would come down from his caves, wander in the village, wander in the countryside, and people would approach him, and they would have these really fascinating conversations, where they would share their sort of innermost thoughts, their innermost questions, with him. So we can imagine doing that, asking him a question. But because he's Milarepa, he doesn't just, he will acknowledge you and listen, but then actually his response to you is a song. So that again is, that doesn't happen, does it? Where somebody's standing there and you ask them a question and they sing to you. And as they're singing, that's already shocking that they've burst into song. But it's not a song you've ever heard before or will probably ever hear again, because it's a song about you. It's a song about your mind. It's a song about your heart. It's a song about the question that you've brought. It's a song about your fears. It's a song about your hopes. It's a song about your aspirations. And you're hearing yourself in that song. And you're drawn in more and more to what he's saying. And you realise you're being given a very important, very significant lesson, a very important teaching. And you sort of it's like you're drinking the song up. And then it ends. And then he goes. And then you're left wondering what next. What do you do with the teaching that you've received? Can you unhear what you've heard? This is what I think people were left with. Some people that he encountered, they said straight away, please let me be your student. Yeah, I want to learn from you. That was the effect that he would have. Others would be left pondering the teaching and trying to make sense of what had happened to them. So that's what I imagine encountering Milarepa would be like, or something like that. So we've just sort of entered our imagination there, and then before that we had the description of him. So we had, he's spontaneous, he's direct, but actually the experience, imagining him is a different thing again, isn't it? There's a real difference between the conceptualization, the sort of words to describe, and then actually just putting ourselves in the shoes and imagining being in front of him. That's more like imagining a direct encounter, a direct experience. So yes, I sort of was thinking, we do have to use our concepts, those words, because they help us sort of bridge a gap, yes? So there's Milarepa, the being over here, there's where we are over here. We read a story, we hear a talk about him, we try and describe him, but then entering the imagination is a different thing again, yes? So we're kind of using our concepts to move closer to something akin to the experience. So our concepts are important, but they're not the experience, yeah? They're not the experience. And you'll find that because, as I said, sometimes they contradict each other. So we say about Milarepa that he's this great poet. He burst into song. So he burst into song. He composed these spontaneous songs. So we can say, very poetic. Very, very poetic, language that he used. At the same time, he was also very direct and plain speaking. He would tell you things as they were. He wouldn't mince his words either. So it wasn't always comfortable actually being around him. We say that he was unpredictable, like he would wander around, do what he wanted to do. He was not bound by any sort of rules or conventions. So we say that about him. And yet he also had very strong, committed, long-standing relationships with people. All his students, he had patrons, people that looked out for him, and he was very devoted and committed to his teacher, Marpa. So again, we've got these paradoxes, sort of very unpredictable, spontaneous, and at the same time deeply committed, deeply devoted. So even when we have our concepts, they can't quite fit the experience. So we can't pin him down. And in a way, his songs, I was thinking, what was the point? What's the essence of what he's trying to teach us? And in a way, that's part of his teaching. Who he is, those sort of paradoxes, the inability to pin him down, that's part of what he's trying to convey, really. So there's one song that I want to just look at a bit, which I think really sort of brings this alive. a bit. And what he's trying to do in his songs is, help us. Well, he helps us use the mind, yes, the sort of concepts and our theories to understand the mind, which is indefinable. Yeah, using the mind to understand the mind, which is undefinable. So there's a one of his. It's actually not from the Yogi's Joy, but it's a well-known song of his, and it's called "The Shepherd's Search for Mind." And so in this song, there's two shepherds that come to. Well, they just wander over, and there he is. They're actually lost. These two boys are lost. And they see this guy by a cave, and they think, well, maybe he obviously is from round here. He'll be able to help us get back to where we need to be. So they go over to him, but they're curious because he looks a bit odd. So they're kind of curious, and one of the shepherds says, "Oh, so do you have a companion? You here by yourself, or do you have a companion?" And he says, "Yes, I have a companion." So, well, who is he then? And they say, his name is Bodhi Heart. Bodhi means enlightened, yeah? His name is Bodhi Heart. So they go, okay, where is he then? And he says, he's in the house of the universal seed consciousness. And they go, okay, now they go, what do you actually mean? What do you mean by that? So they're getting confused now because they're just having they've encountered him, they're having an ordinary conversation, but he's not talking a language that they understand. So they're like, okay, what do you actually mean by this? And Milarepa says, my own body. So now the older the boy says, okay, I think we best go, yeah? So, because he's like, this guy is not going to get us where we want to go. He's obviously thinking he's a bit weird. Every question they ask, very straightforward question, they get this response back that they don't get. Yeah. So the older one says, "Look, should we just go now?" But the younger boy says, so he says, "My own body," and the younger boy says, "Do you mean this consciousness is mind itself, and that the physical body is the house of the mind?" So something's changed in the communication. Before they were speaking at completely different levels, like not speaking to each other at all. The older boy still thinking, okay, this is all a bit weird, we just need to find out where we need to go. The younger boy, suddenly there's a connection, isn't there, between the younger boy and Milarepa. They meet. And Milarepa affirms him. He goes, yes, that's right. So the boy then says, we know that although a house usually belongs only to one person, many people can enter it. So we always find a number of people living in one house. In the same way, is there only one mind in the body, or are there many? If there are many, how do they live together? So that's the question. Is there only one mind in the body or many? And if so, if there are many, how do they live together? What do we make of that question, and why do you think he's even asking it? What's beneath that question, do you think? Is it a strange question to ask?
No, because there's always more than one side to almost every single situation you can get yourself into. You know?
Okay.
You can be of one mind and you can be of another mind.
Yeah.
One way of looking at things, there's different points of view, and we can sometimes see them ourselves.
Yeah. We often say it, don't we?
Yeah.
Well, I was in two minds. I was in two minds. And then when we say that, we know sometimes there's more than two minds, yeah? There's sometimes several minds going on, yeah? So that's what the boy is kind of saying. The boy is really saying, he's trying to understand the mind. He's trying to understand the mind. Is it one? Is it many? And that other question about, well, if it's many, if you have two minds, how do they coexist? How do our different minds coexist? Do they coexist happily? No. No, okay. So we know that, and again, that's how we know that there's different things that's going on within our experiences, because there's sometimes conflict. There's tension between our different experiences that happen, it feels like, simultaneously sometimes. So the boy is really beginning to engage with Milarepa in this narrative. So then Milarepa says, actually, there's only one mind in the body. He goes, as to whether there's only one mind in the body or many, you'd better go and find that out yourself. So that's what he says. And the young boy says, all right, yeah, I'll go and try. Very straightforward, isn't it? Like, you've given me some interesting information, I'm exploring something, and you've just given me permission to go off and, like, it's a valid question. It's a really valid question to ask. And this guy has given me permission to go and discover more about it, yeah? So off he goes. And I was thinking, yeah, it's very good. I mean, he shows, this young boy shows that he's very open, he's very receptive, he's ready to learn. And if you're open and receptive, then learning comes quickly. But actually we're not always open and receptive, are we? We sometimes take a long time to decide to do something. Even to meditate in the morning, we can go, today, not today, 5 minutes, half an hour. We can prevaricate, can't we, over the thing that we know is going to benefit us. Whereas this boy just says yes. And it's not a naive yes, because he's the one with the question. Yeah, he's the one that interested in finding out that question. So he's got permission that it's a valid question, and he's going to go and discover the answer. So then he turns up the next day. He sorts his sheep out after work, and he turns up by himself. So the older boy, not interested. The young one comes by himself, and he says, "Dear Lama, last night I tried to find out what my mind is and how it works. I observed it carefully and found that I have only one mind. Even though one wants to, one cannot kill this mind. However much one wishes to dismiss it, it will not go away. If one tries to catch it, it cannot be grasped. If you want it to remain, it will not stay. If you release it, it will not go. You try to see it, it cannot be seen. You try to understand it, it cannot be known. It is something illuminating, aware, wide awake, yet incomprehensible." So what do we make of that? Do you relate to any of that? What does he mean by even if you want to, you cannot kill the mind, or however much you will dismiss it, it will not go away? What does he mean by that?
It's like thoughts that you don't want to be having. You can't stop them. You can't control them. It's easier to. It's almost. It's like a little naughty child, isn't it?
Right, yeah. So we have these incessant thoughts, yeah, and we might decide, I'm not going to think about that now. Yeah, I've got something to do. I'm not going to think about this. And then next thing you know, there it comes. Yeah, a whole train of thoughts. I'm not going to think about this, but there it comes again. It's actually, and it can get quite infuriating, can't it? You think, why can't I just not do this? But when you sit to meditate, I mean, that's why meditation is so important, because you actually begin to understand how the mind works. You begin to realise, actually, thoughts will just appear. Thoughts will just appear when you sit to meditate. So especially when you start doing the mindfulness of breathing for the first time, you think, right, I'm going to count to 10. That's very straightforward. I can do that. And then you get to 3, and then a thought comes in, and then you find yourself not able to get back to the counting. And you don't understand it. I remember when I first started to meditate, I don't understand it. Why can I not get to 10? It was like this great puzzle. Until I began to speak to other people and realise, that's what the mind does. And of course, my mind had always been doing that, not being able to do the thing that I said I wanted it to do, but I hadn't noticed it until I sat to meditate. So it's when you sit to meditate, you begin to see the mind more clearly. And then once you see it more clearly, you begin to think, okay, this is, how do we approach the mind? If that's part of its way it works, the ordinary mind, then how do we work with it in a way that's actually helpful and going to take us where we want to go? So yes, meditation and retreats are really, I mean, we always talk about retreats, but one of the reasons is that you have this sustained experience of your mind, in good conditions, so that you can begin to find those more creative ways of working with your mind. So anyway, this young boy comes back with some really interesting results, doesn't he, from his inquiry, and Milarepa basically sends him off again. Let's see, what does he say this time? So yes, he's come back and he says this. He says, listen to me, dear shepherd, protector of sheep. By merely hearing about sugar's taste, sweetness cannot be experienced. Though one's mind may understand what sweetness is, it cannot experience it directly. Only the tongue can know it. In the same way, one cannot see in full the nature of mind, though he may have a glimpse of it if it has been pointed out by others. One relies not on this glimpse, but continues searching for the nature of mind. He will see it fully in the end. Dear shepherd, in this way you should observe your mind. So I really love that one about by merely hearing about sugar's taste, sweetness cannot be experienced. Only the tongue can know it. Why do you think he's saying any of this? What do you get from that?
You have to kind of go into your body.
Go into your body. Yeah.
It's called direct experience.
Yeah. It's again about having that direct experience. That's where, so he's saying that you can be pointed out, so somebody can teach you and guide you and say, hey, look in this direction, yeah? Which is what when we read books, when we come to a class, that's what we're doing. We're being pointed out, guided in a certain direction. But the transformation, and that will help, because we need a sort of understanding, we need a framework, we need a conceptual understanding of things. So it will definitely help. It's part of the bridge, if you like. But then we need our own direct experience. Yeah, you need your own encounter, if you like. You know, like we did the encounter with Milarepa. We need our own encounter. So he's really encouraging the shepherd to keep going and learn from his own experience. So then he gives them a specific question. Okay, so I'd like you to go off now and find out what colour and shape is your mind, and where is it in the body. And when we say mind here, I'm talking about mind and heart. Yeah, so the two things together. They're both similar in a sense. In Buddhism, mind and heart, chitta is the word, and we use them sort of interchangeably, mind and heart. Yeah. So where is it in the body? So that's what he has to go off and find out next. So that's a very interesting question. Where is the mind in the body? Do we have any ideas where the mind is in the body? Is it contained by the body? How many of you think that the mind is contained by the body? Just put your hands up if you think it's contained by the body. Can it exist without the body? Can we answer these questions? Well, they're really kind of questions that are tricky, difficult to answer intellectually, yeah, with our mind. Very hard to answer these questions, even impossible to answer these questions with our ordinary mind. But the shepherd's gone off to meditate, so he comes back with an answer, and see if you can relate to this. So he says, well, it has no colour or shape. I think we knew that, right? I think we probably could, but yeah, the mind doesn't have a colour or shape. It's not oblong, is it, the mind, or pink? You know, we sort of could know that. So it has no colour or shape. When it associates with the eyes, it sees. When with the ear it hears, when with the nose it smells, when with the tongue it tastes and talks. And when it associates with the feet, it walks. If the body is agitated, the mind too is stirred. So what's he's doing there is really seeing the relationship between body and mind, yes? And again, when we meditate, when we sit to meditate, that's actually one of the really important thing we're doing, is bringing mind and body together so there is a direct relationship. And often we don't have that direct relationship because why don't we have that direct relationship? Well, our thoughts and minds are doing one thing and we're not in touch with our bodies, yeah? When we sort of introduce meditation, we say, right, connect with your body. Sometimes I'll ask a group, well, how many of you right now feel a connection body? And half the room won't feel that, at least. They'll have an experience of their body, but it'll be sort of up here somehow, because actually they're more conscious of thoughts. Yeah. And anytime you're distressed or upset or there's tension, you'll often not be really connected with your body. Yeah. So you can just explore that. You can just, in the course of a day, just think, actually, am I in touch with my body right now? Yeah. Is mind and body together? Are they in relationship with each other? Just asking that question will open quite a lot of things up. So then he goes on to say, normally, this is a shepherd, normally the mind directs the body. That's true, isn't it? The mind will direct the body. Yeah. When the body is in good condition, the mind can command it at will. But when the body becomes old, decayed or bereft, the mind will leave it behind without a thought, as one throws away a stone after cleaning oneself. That's a very strong thing as well, isn't it? When the body is no longer functioning, what happens to the mind? That death really brings it up, doesn't it? If you've ever seen or been close to someone who's dying, you really ask that question, like, once they've died, where have they gone? It's a really powerful, it's like you can't escape that question. Where have they gone? Where's their mind? Where's their heart gone? You can see it's no longer contained within the body. But for me anyway, neither does it feel like it's completely gone either. It's a fascinating thing. And he goes on to say the mind is very realistic and adaptable. On the other hand, the body does not remain quiet or submissive. That's interesting as well, isn't it? The body sometimes we hear that the body's got a mind of its own, or the body will have an impact on the mind. Yeah, I mean, when we're ill, we know that. Yeah, we've got a cold, we've got a backache. It has a huge effect. It can have a huge effect on the mind. So the body, he says, frequently gives the trouble to the mind. It causes suffering and pain, and the mind loses its self-control. At night, in the state of sleep, the mind goes away. It is indeed very busy and hard-working. It is clear to me that all my sufferings are caused by it. That's a shepherd's conclusions, that all suffering is caused by the mind. And I want to ask, is that true? What do we think? Is that true, that all our suffering is caused by mind? Anyone who doesn't think it's true?
It's difficult, isn't it? Because it's like, what do you call... Mind's not really the brain, is it? I mean, everything's processed through the brain, isn't it? Yeah. Well, I don't know, it's difficult, isn't it? Because there's genuine, just physical suffering, which you could say the mind's not necessarily making worse. You just genuinely are suffering because you're in pain. Or something like
So pain is there, so we all will experience pain. Suffering, we talk about this when we teach, mindfulness, secular mindfulness as well. So we can be in pain. There's a whole course that teaches how to work with pain. And you can be in pain, and that's a real thing. Yeah, your body is in distress in some way, and the way we relate to that pain has an effect on our mind. Yes. So there are times when, say you've got a backache, You'll know you've got a backache, and it will be causing you real physical and emotional distress. And there are times you've got a backache and it's causing you physical distress, and you're not consumed by it. You're able to still relate to other things, yes? You're still able to, have some moments of joy as well. So suffering in the sense of how we relate to our experience. There'll be pain, there will always be pain in our experience. There'll always be some pleasure in our experience, and there'll be that's in between. But how we relate to that experience is what will cause suffering to be perpetuated or not. So that's a real core Buddhist teaching around how we relate to our experience. What happens when we're in pain is that we often resist it. We don't want to be in pain. We want to be somewhere else. And that in itself causes upset and distress. Do you see that? Yeah. If we can they sort of recommend sort of relaxing into it, experiencing the pain without the judgments around it, that eases our experience. So really interesting to explore. So again, next time you've got some kind of physical discomfort going on, just sort of see what your mind is doing. What's your mind's relationship with that physical discomfort, and see play with it a bit. Okay, right now I don't want this discomfort. What impact does that have then on your body and mind? And if you're open to it, if you're willing to explore it, then what impact does that have? So these are all the things the shepherd is really learning, and in the end, Milarepa can see that he's really ready. He's really ready to go further. He's really ready to explore the teachings much more. But before he gives him any more instructions, he tells him about the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. He tells him about the three jewels. And he basically introduced him to the idea of enlightenment, the path of the teachings, meditation, ethics. He introduced him to the idea of community, spiritual community, the teachings and teachers and lineage. And there's lots of reasons why he does that. And one of them is because, if you've got a context to actually explore the nature of mind and heart, is it's very powerful, actually. It's a very powerful thing to actually look at your experience in this way. And without a context, it can actually be, I think, potentially destabilising in a way. You're kind of seeing into mind itself, and you're beginning to ask some really profound questions, which is what the shepherd's doing. He's asking some quite profound questions about really how the whole of life works. If you know that actually many people have done this before you, there are steps to take, steps to, taking one step at a time. You know that when you make a discovery, so you discover, there's so much more to my experience than I realise. My mind is a lot more flexible and adaptable than I realise. If you have that experience, then when you've got a context for practicing, you know that really the point of that is not just to go on this discovery. The point of that is to alleviate your suffering. The point of it is to alleviate your suffering. The point of it is to benefit others as well. Through your own transformation, you can benefit others. Also, ethics are important. It's important how when you go off on retreat, this happens on retreat quite a lot. If you go off on retreat, you might have an experience, a big experience, and then you come back, to your life. You come back to your relationships, you come back to your work, you come back to all the things that were going on before. And then you've somehow got to integrate the experience that you've had into your life. And that's not always an easy thing to do. Yeah? It's not always an easy thing to do. So you need other people that can support you to do that. But once you do integrate it, then there's real change that happens. Yeah, you actually realise, you can be a bit kinder. You can be less fixed or rigid about things. You can be more open to another. because you've got a way of working with the mind now. You've got a way of working with it. You understand it a bit more, but you're doing that in relationship with others. Yeah, and that's really important. It's not just for one's own sort of ego actually, or to think you're amazing. It's about how you change and how you grow and how you alleviate your suffering and the suffering of others. And if you've got the context of practicing, if you know about the Buddha and ethics, karma, conditionality, that really supports you to do that, as well as to take one step at a time. Yeah. So he basically gives him that context, and then he introduces him to really what the essence of what Milarepa talked about was a word called Mahamudra. So Mahamudra just means, well, if I say just, Mahamudra is, Maha is great and Mudra is gesture. So it's a great attitude, the great gesture, the great seal. So Mahamudra teaching is known as, in Tibetan Buddhism, is known as a sort of almost the ultimate sort of teaching, if you like, the great teaching. So he introduces him to Mahamudra teachings, which all emphasizes direct experience, and direct experience, and the phases. So you have the foundations, which is understanding the importance of direct experience. Then you have the path, which is meditation and ethics, so you can integrate those experiences into your actual life, into your behaviour. And then you have the end, the fruition, where the path actually leads you. There's a point to it all, yeah? The point is about alleviating suffering and benefiting beings. So how do we use this for now? How do we we've talked about the body quite a bit, the importance of engaging with the body. How else can we use it? So one thing is, Kusala Sara earlier on was talking about the importance of relaxation. It can sound, Milarepa, when we look at his life, he lived this really a renunciate life in the caves, living on nettles, meditating for days and weeks on end. It can sound quite tough in a way, but it all begins with relaxation. It all begins there, because we're relaxing into our experience, into our direct experience. And when we're also relaxing into our direct experience, we're allowing the mind to relax. We're allowing the mind to let go of concepts, to let go of our previous held views of the world. We have very fixed ways of experiencing ourselves and other people. I'm like this, you're like this, this is like that, the door does this. And actually, when you really relax in that alert way that Kusala Sara was talking about earlier, you're also relaxing your concepts. You're opening up, which is what the shepherd does. The shepherd's asking these questions, and each time there's something's opening up. Yeah, more and more, his understanding of the world, his understanding of himself is opening up, and old concepts, restricted views are being let go. So what you actually arrive at is this spaciousness, and when there's spaciousness, there's joy. Interestingly, joy is what emerges. With spaciousness, there's also a sense of brightness, alertness, energy. So relaxation takes us very, very far down the path. So one thing we can do is, which is a practice I try and do, we've got our formal meditation practice. Hopefully you're practicing and learning about ethics as well. You're hopefully connecting and in relationship with others. That also has an effect on us, learning about other people's practice and being able to share our own. But one thing, a really very simple thing you can do it tomorrow, you can do it tonight, is to do nothing. Have 5 minutes of doing nothing. Nothing at all. So you might think, well, that's not a big deal to do nothing. And actually, it's actually not an easy practice. Why do you think it's not an easy practice? What do you think the challenge of that practice is?
So our minds don't want to do nothing.
Our minds don't want to do nothing, yeah?
It's a demand for our time.
Sorry?
Lots of demands on our time.
We think I'm just sitting here doing nothing when I've got X and Y and Z to do. Yeah. I'm wasting time. That's the thing. Yeah, you're wasting time when you sit and do nothing. So there's this pressure on you, like I'm sitting here for 5 minutes doing nothing. I could be. We have all these ideas of what we'll accomplish in 5 minutes. Often, quite unrealistic, really often. But if you sit there for 5 minutes and just give yourself permission, a bit like Milarepa gave the shepherd permission to ask that question about mind. Just sit there and give yourself permission to just see what the mind does. And experience the body. Experience the body and mind for 5 minutes without formally meditating. So you're not trying to do the stages of anything. You're just sitting there and noticing what happens. So you can notice sounds. You'll probably notice sounds. You'll notice sights, colours. You might notice sensations, textures. You'll notice thoughts, feelings that arise, and you're just going to allow them to just arise and notice. That's all you've got to do. Whatever comes into your awareness, you're going to allow sort of to be there and for it to go. Yeah, and this is quite an interesting practice, because what happens after a while, if you can stay with it, is that our normal way of fixing things. So we hear a sound and we think, okay, that's a car. Yeah, that's what our mind automatically will do. Go, that's a car. Okay, this feeling that I'm having, that's an irritation. We will label things. But the more you just sit and do nothing, those labels sort of can evaporate, and you're just with the experience of sound. You're just with the sensation that you would normally call anxiety. Yeah, you're just with this something flying through the air that you'd normally call bird, and you're just with your experience, your direct experience, and you're noticing what impact it has. That's actually a very relaxing thing to do as well, because you're letting go, you're allowing the mind to open up in a way that we don't normally allow ourselves, because we've got a way of organising our experience, yes? And when you do that, if things relax, but your mind becomes a little bit more flexible, you become a little bit more curious about what's really going on, yeah? You become more curious about what's going on, a bit more engaged as well with your experience of life. So you're not having to live life like I get up, I go to work, I come back. There's a lot more richness in our experience if we give ourselves permission to just step back and notice. So this is what the shepherd does. He does this. In the end, there's a lovely little story at the end where he goes off. Milarepa's given him all these instructions, and he goes off, and he thinks, I've sorted out the sheep. I'm going to just meditate for a few moments. So he sits to meditate, and goes on his inquiry, and then he doesn't realise that days are gone by, and his family send a search party out for him, and he then emerges, and he gets a bit irritated because they're like, oh, all this fuss, I'm only sitting here for 5 minutes, and then they're sending out search parties, etc. And he doesn't realise, of course, that actually not only is his concept of himself changed, his experience of himself has really expanded, so has his experience of time. He's gained so much more time than he was aware of. So yes, time and space and oneself and others can open up if we notice our experience and be with the body and mind in direct experience. So thank you very much for